Thanks, Pat. That's wonderful. Welcome to everybody on this first real autumn day. I think we've had a more of a summer up until now. I'm going to introduce Bob. It's really my pleasure to do that. He's the Mary Rowell Jackman Professor of Humanities at the University of Toronto, and he's at Victoria College in the faculty of the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. But that doesn't exist anymore, so I have to update this because it now has merged with Italian studies. And he has taken on the very heavy job of being the associate chair undergraduate of a merged department in the first year of its merger. So, Bob, congratulations to, or maybe condolences, I don't know. He's the author of Jazz Age Barcelona, which was shortlisted for the Canada Prize, and The Hotel Occupied Space, and then his latest project, The Scent of Spain, Fragrance, Odor, and Culture, which looks at key fragrances and smells that were part of Spain's modern experience. Professor Davidson currently serves as the director of the Northrop Frye Center. This is his last year, so he's going to go on to other wonderful activities, I'm sure. And he also chairs the manuscript review committee at the University of Toronto Press. He's founder and co-editor of the Toronto Iberic Book series. And again, another update, he takes his martini with a little bit extra vermouth and an olive, and here's the update, and a bit of lemon. Also, he wants a beer at lunch, but if you tempt him with cava and tapas, he'll take that too. Bob.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you. Oh. All right.
Just push.
There we go. Okay. Bob Davidson is talking. All right. Thank you very much, Anne, for the introduction. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Daphne, for the invitation here. It's a real pleasure. And I'm lucky over at Victoria College to have at the Northrop Frye Center a wonderful space, and it really does make a difference, right, to be in a beautiful space. So thank you to the faculty club as well for hosting this. When Anne told me to talk for 3 hours, I thought, all right, that's a little weird, but okay. So, but I will always, as always, try to ascribe to the first rule of invited lecture, which is do not be boring. Okay, so we don't truly appreciate our sense of smell until it's temporarily gone. Yet, even still, it doesn't get much respect, right? In the hierarchy of the senses, sight's reign has been indisputable, with hearing following close behind. Meanwhile, smell and its erstwhile companion taste have long been treated as an afterthought amongst the humanities. Smell, on account of its ineffability, a lack of dedicated vocabulary to describe it, its gender coding in moral issues, and its long perceived connection to illness and disease. Taste, because food and drink couldn't possibly be serious subjects, and because kitchen work, of course, has always been devalued, once again on gender and class grounds. Things need to change. Yes. So smelling the humanities it is. All right. Okay. So I admit that my title is a bit weird, but that's exactly the point, right? Other versions sound normal, even cool. Seeing the humanities, thinking the humanities, even hearing the humanities. The alliteration helps, right? But tasting, feeling, smelling the humanities, it's like we're doing something dirty. And actually, we are coloring outside the lines, aren't we? By activating those senses in such an unanticipated way, we move into a space where the metaphors change just enough that we become aware of just how vision-centric things really are. While the common notion of seeing is believing has dominated Western thought for centuries, we are slowly becoming attuned to other ways of knowing, something that's clearly patent also in the gradual opening up in the West to indigenous epistemologies. And actually, in an age where increasingly we cannot trust our eyes, right? With these deep fakes and everything, the Pope, surfing on a dolphin or whatever it is, I would venture that smell tells us quite a lot in any given moment. And if you stop and think about it, it is a deeply powerful sense that can evoke instant physical responses in us, both good and bad, and as a result, profoundly shape how we interact in social spaces. And all you have to do is think about a time you got on a streetcar or the subway, right? And there's a bad odor and people instantly move away, right? We instantly have a physical reaction. As COVID-19 has unfortunately made clear for many, smell is a part of our lives that we often take for granted. And while Proust's Madeleine famously connected taste to memory, the actual phenomena of how we savor things and why emotions lock in sense with such a power to transport us through both space and time has been linked directly to our sense of smell. Research in olfactory culture is a field on the rise across the board from from the humanities to bioscience. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, I have to move this first. Oops. Oh, it's not going. Let me be the first to point out that I'm speaking under an umbrella of ideas that have been a large part of the work of many stellar scholars and educators for decades. Constance Classen, David Howes, Carolyn Korsmeyer, Anthony Sinnott, Jim Drobnik, Alain Corbin, and Laura Marks have all paved the way for lesser senses such as smell and taste to be considered seriously by the Academy. But while academic vogues can be cyclical, think of the many fashionable turns, right, that occur every few years, what does change quite radically is the context in which we live and teach, especially regarding tech in the classroom, and more recently, these large language models, which, if you're now retired from teaching, oh, you're missing out on all the fun. By now, we all know the easy convenience of a Zoom lecture or call, but if pandemic teaching taught us one thing, it's that humanities needs humans. Being together changes the way we do things and the way we learn things. To put it in academic ease, it's a multisensory mode of communication and exchange that allows for nuances that technology has not yet been able to replicate. Reading Alonso Quijano's Self-Creation of Don Quixote together, or discussing the death of Emma Bovary, are patently different when you share the same space. But that said, as my colleague Dan Bender, who I think who's gonna speak to you next semester, is fond of observing, the hierarchy of the senses is still in full force at the university. In a typical classroom, you're really only allowed to do two things: watch and listen. No active feeling, no tasting, and no smelling. And that, I argue, is what we need to change. In the face of declining enrollments, attacks on the so-called utility of the humanities, justify, measure, and the rise of the virtual and AI, it's more important than ever that we destabilize this hierarchy and incorporate smell and taste into both our research and our teaching. Siri, hang up. By doing so, I believe that we can activate ourselves and our students in novel ways and through a process of perceptual enrichment that promotes sensory subjectivity, both in and outside the classroom, together contribute to transformative, transformational learning. This talk. Oh, it's your fall monitor. Okay, I wasn't quite sure. That's good. A friend of mine actually was on he was on a scooter and he got hit by a car, fell down. No one stopped to help him, but his watch said, "You seem to have had a bad fall. Do you want me to call an ambulance?" And he's like, "No." But yeah, isn't that wow? I'm glad everything's okay. All right, so where was I? So yes, this idea of promoting sensory perception and sensory subjectivity, both in and outside the classroom, I think together contribute to transformational and transformative learning. And I borrow the perceptual enrichment notion from Lachance, Aimont, and Vinit, and their idea that it helps people be in their body in a different way through conscious awareness. And I think this is true in a pedagogical setting too. At the same time as we come to realize that perceiving and understanding sensation is a category of work that is distinctly human and requires humans for its development. So sociologist and educator Jack Mezirow famously theorized transformative learning as a way to combine individual growth and social development such that we collectively humanize our worlds by recognizing the oppressive, unfair, or unsustainable aspects of the discourses by which we live. Now, I'm not saying that smell and taste can do this sort of heavy lifting on their own, but what I am suggesting is that the type of sensory learning for which many of us are advocating can contribute to a broader understanding of context, which is part and parcel of the stronger sense of community that emerges in Mesereau's model. By facilitating understanding or knowledge transfer through a more synesthetic or intersensorial framework, I believe that we can contribute to transformations in ourselves and in our students. And you know what? Change doesn't always have to be painful or disruptive, right? It can, it can involve hedonic empathy, right? Instrumental and communicative learning can add and expand, especially in olfactory and taste situations where we cast off the asceticism of the academy and our understanding of context is broadened and challenged by direct sensory experience that in turn makes us more aware as embodied sensing subjects. So let's insist on the human in all our senses and keep this transformative element in mind as we go along. And remember, it's okay to enjoy what you do, right? This is like, I think, been one of my biggest frustrations with the university is like, if you're doing something fun or pleasurable, people look down on you or the institution doesn't want you to do this, right? So especially through taste and smell. So, and this is really good gin. Thank you. I made that joke to some first years and then they ratted me out. Remember that? And you said, one of the students said you were drinking at 9 a.m. I'm like, all right. So let me first point out that my title slide was created by that little mini AI designer embedded in PowerPoint. And I kept it because it tells us what associations the machine assembles around these terms. And here it kind of looks like someone has blown their nose, right, on the slide, maybe in a humanistic way, right? And check out the alternative it gave me for smelling the archive. So this one, that's nice, that's fine. It gave me that, right? So, all right, let's go back. Yeah, so smelling the archive means not only approaching traditional archival materials from new angles, but also being open to a radical change in what we imagine an archive to be. So let me talk about both briefly, and then we can smell something that I found from 1929, actually. I didn't go back in time, it came to me. And I've used it in class. So the first notion entails approaching archival materials from a new sense. I'm tempted to say look through a different lens, but I'm trying to cut back on the vision metaphors that I use, and it's hard. And being open to using synesthesia as a method for investigating meaning in new forms. So here, Mark M. Smith's intersensorial approach to history underpins the way in which we can look at what has been deemed worthy of preservation, and through its absence, that which has not. Okay. By challenging the manners in which traditional archives are reduced or limited to dominant senses, we change the chip, as the Spanish say, and open ourselves to alternative archival findings and the production of a dialogue that generates a practice of intersensorial humanity inquiry instead of an assemblage of discrete methods, which of course is totally fine for traditional needs and means. But what I want to stress here is that arguably all archives have a multisensory potential. For example, just because it's a photograph doesn't mean it's a strictly visual archive. In this way, synesthesia comes in as a methodology when we seek to interpret senses via others and by accepting how the blend in our experiences, both past and present, right? How the senses blend in our experiences, both past and present. Now, I think we can normalize this type of inquiry by recognizing that in many cases we may already be doing it, especially in cultural studies, but it would be more productive, to do so more mindfully. Okay, so that's cool. You may be thinking, but why? So what if things are limited? Why is this important? Let me tell you what I think. It's important because in limiting the ways in which we consider our collective experience as held and organized by archives, we have been effectively alienating parts of ourselves from ourselves. By valorizing only one or two types of sensory experience as knowledge vehicles or as knowledge tout court, we've limited our range of understanding and foreclosed on deep sensations like smell and taste that comprise an incredible amount of our daily experience and make up a wealth of knowledge that we don't even consider knowledge. So let's ask weird questions of the archive. Let's see what we find when we adjust our sensorial compass just a tad. And I encourage all of you to think of how training a so-called lesser sense on something you already know very well can provide a new perspective or validate or activate or unearth a new, different way of understanding something. Smells and tastes communicate things that can be hard to put into words because we're not used to doing so. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And my favorite example is to think of the smell and taste of a good tomato, right? We're just finishing what has been a great season for tomatoes, right? So think of everything that is communicated by those senses engaging with that tomato, right? At first, it seems hard to articulate, but there are many elements that are easy to bring into discourse, right? Such as the tomato's origin, the varietal, right? Did you go get it from the Mennonites on Saturday morning, right? They've got this incredible selection of different varietals. Our memories of tomatoes in general, how it builds other flavors, right? Umami, its possible cultural significance, etc., along with the ripeness, freshness, its actual flavor in the mouth. And actually, this is now making me think of seed banks as archives of smell and taste in their own right, right? Now, and then keep that taste in your mouth and in your mind, because in February, you know, the tomatoes are not going to be the same, right? Here in Toronto, anyway. If you escape to Italy or Berkeley, then maybe this. But so now, in the case of my present research on the smell of Spain in the 20th century, this different approach to the archive means specifically seeking out things, seeking out what I call olfactive adjacent material related to the Spanish modern experience in conventional holdings. Olfactive adjacent, right? So things, again, this is going through using synesthesia, right? To say, all right, how is the visual going to sort of tell us or convey smell, right? And I'm going to show you some examples. Things like print media related to product promotion, manuals, legislation, as well as representations of scent in art. The task when working with these types of materials is first to identify them and evaluate whether or how an intersensorial approach might contribute to a deeper interpretation of what they may offer solely at a visual level, right? And, you know, the thing about, you know, the archives of all the archives we work at, all of them have been digitized, right? But as you know, and if you work with books, right, the smell of a book, the paper, right, you're at the mercy of the person who digitized. You know, I one time asked for, I was working on a magazine from 1930s Catalonia. I asked them to send, they have a duplicate. They did a perfect duplicate and they had it at Widener. And I asked them to send it to me and they're like, no, it's digitized. But whoever did the digitizing didn't digitize the ads. And that's what I wanted, right? So I had to use my startup grant to buy the thing myself. But anyway, it all worked out. Luckily, I'm at U of T. Anyway, where are we? Once we've done that a few times, right? Once we start to retrain sort of our nose or our eye, it's possible to pinpoint recurring tropes and aesthetic or rhetorical techniques related to issues of class, gender, race, and especially during periods of dictatorship ideology, and see how they also inflect our understanding of smell in the past. So if the first part of this sensory approach to archives that I'm describing is open to the rich sensorial valence of traditional fond, the second brings into question what constitutes an archive in the first place. Here's where material culture scholars have been playing for a long while, and where those of us interested in smell particularly are able to go for firsthand experiences of the different texts that we study. I'm talking, of course, about so-called extra institutional archives like flea markets, antique shops, online sellers like eBay. I'm also interested in weird niche and company factory museums, right? There's a lot of them in Spain, but you have to invite me back if you want to hear about those. In these informal archives, one can find a wide variety of materials, sometimes organized, sometimes not, all parts of the detritus of daily life, right? Objects that have been relieved of use value and are now subject to that new market, right? The market of the collector. Because smell is a time machine, it allows us to inform and connect our sensory perspective in a direct, vital way to the past. This is especially useful and effective in the classroom. Smelling together elicits a wide variety of responses, not unlike reading together. And while elaborating on context is helpful, the raw experience of scent is intensely subjective. Now, since you've been such a patient audience, and no one has fallen. Let's combine both aspects of smelling the archive and put our noses on a very interesting perfume from the 1920s that's part of this book project on the scent of Spain. And at the same time, we'll have a look at how this particular company sought to express the scent visually and physically. This is the synesthetic angle, okay? All right, so what I'm gonna do is we're gonna pass out some scent strips. If you're scent sensitive, you might not wanna take one, or you might wanna move to the back of the room or take some air. Well, I've sprayed the thin end, right? So hold this like that and then smell. And I'm gonna give you some tips on smelling, all right? So first off, when you're at a duty free and you're smelling a bunch of different things, our noses get tired really quickly. So what you can do is if you want to reset your nose, you smell yourself, because we're neutral to ourselves, and that will reset your nose. Now, if you want to continuously smell something, it's not super elegant, but you have to sniff like a dog, because by sniffing, it resets the nose. So hold it to your nose, and you can see how it prolongs the smell, right? So just take a couple moments, smell that, talk to the person next to you. What notes are you getting? Is it reminding anyone of anything? And then we'll chat. People at home, smell. This is the original bottle. And you can see this one. This is from 1929. And you can see how it's evaporated. And inside, there is a little piece of sandalwood. Okay? So what scents are you getting from this? I just gave you one. Although it's not that much. Cinnamon. Grandmothers. It's really funny, right? Because a lot of times when I started this project, I ordered, because it actually, I got into scent because the collaborative food stuff we were doing, we couldn't do during COVID, right? So we're sitting there and I'm trying to think, okay, this idea of like, how do we communicate taste, right? If I've never had a persimmon, right? How do you communicate that to someone? And on one side, it's kind of fluffy, but on the other side is very philosophical, right? And so I was thinking, oh, well, people who write about perfume also need to, describe it and everything. So I went down the rabbit hole. I started ordering books. And then there's a place in Atlanta called Perfumed Court. And I was able to smell my way through the 20th century, ordering all of these. My house filled up full of samples. Luckily, my wife's nose is not very sensitive. And then when I ordered some Spanish stuff, but I ordered Shalimar and Mitsuku, which are they're two classics, right? But my first impression was grandma. And I put them away. And then 6 months later, after I've been training my nose, I went back to them and I'm like, wow, these are masterpieces. Because learning to smell is like learning another language. It was incredible. It was really transformative. And then the way I got into the project is I ordered some Spanish stuff from like a wholesaler, the bottle of Spanish lavender water, right? And then I opened one called Quorum and was instantly transported to the bathroom of my exchange family's place in Valencia, right, when I was a teenager. And I remember the father must have worn it. It was a very popular cologne or perfume. And he was involved in legal stuff with the transition to democracy. And so I thought, wow, this is partly how the transition smelled, right? It was a very popular scent. And then I thought the next step was, what are the other smells of Spanish modernity? And then the book sort of outlined itself with, fine fragrances, functional fragrances, and things. Anyway, let's go back to, this is called Maderas de Oriente, woods of the East, okay? And you can sort of see, the trope here, right? So it was originally made with cedar from Lebanon, Arabian sycamore, and sandalwood from Indochina. So it's technically a floral aromatic, a bit soapy. Do you get some soap there? Originally, it would have had top notes of bergamot, orange, and coriander. But those top notes, as you know about perfume, the top notes are often citrus and they burn off, right? Those are the first ones. So whenever you get a perfume the first time, it's usually a citrus that you get, and then you get the heart notes and then the base notes. But here, now we're mainly getting carnation, right? And you see how when I prompt you, you can smell it, right? Carnation, some iris, there's some Bulgarian rose. Less sandalwood than one would expect, and there's a bit of musk and vanilla in there too. All in all, not a bad, has held up quite well, right? And in each bottle, they put a small piece of sandalwood as a way to lure producers. So these are two ads for the Eau de Cologne version, which was created in 1918 for Mirurgia by Lucien Massignier. The ribbon on the tree in the image on the left reads, "Each bottle contains the seductive appeal of the dreamy East." The ad on the right invokes exquisite nostalgia, thus suggesting an already existing smell or scent memory. Or is it simply a call out to a more esoteric, imagined olfactory past, right? And then so this is the bottle here that I have here with this tassel, right? So how do these, and then this is another version. So they updated it in the 20s, and then with Art Deco, you can see, right, the Art Deco influence. So it's this very interesting mix, right, of European aesthetics with this sort of imagined East here, right? So how do these archival pieces smell, right? Let's see if that question can take us beyond where a traditional historical or print culture approach might, with its inquiries into artists, right, and styles, right? If we were to think about this purely, okay, well, who's the artist? What kind of style is being used? For instance, with more time, we might ask, when were certain scents mainstream? What did sandalwood mean in the Spanish context? And given that traditional archives do not preserve olfactory materials per se, we need to triangulate, take something from a dossier and connect it to other holdings. In this way, a simple ad for an eau de cologne can take us to the patents archive, right? Or the collection where brands are filed. I always give a shout out to a grad student at Princeton, Renee Congdon, she's the one who suggested I do that. And I'd never been to the brands archive in Madrid. And I went down and she, most importantly, gave me the name of the archivist, because you know how it is, oh, Renee sent me. Oh, come inside. Here you go, right? These in turn might give us foundational drawings, chemical formulae, right? Narrative descriptions, components that that when combined with all the other ephemera and materials, we can call an olfactory image, right? This creation of an olfactory image that goes beyond the visual to incorporate our sense of smell. The great thing about studying perfume is that it's sculpture, it's narrative, it's chemistry, right? All together. Okay. So more specifically, from the fragrance's paratexts, right, we infer that we are smelling what once was coded as exotic and sensual, right? And thus the question comes to mind from a cultural studies context is, what does it mean that a Spanish perfume house from Barcelona, small house in Barcelona, would adopt the same orientalizing perspective that had been trained on the entire country, right, by Northern Europe? Spain was always considered part of Africa, right? Anything past the Pyrenees, Africa, okay? And especially now we're in Catalonia, close, always looking towards Europe, right? And I'm thinking here, not just in this orientalizing impulse, not just of the Carmen image, right? That sexualized Spanish woman, but also earlier notions that held Spain to be, in Bolufer's words, quote, a liminal area which could trigger the imagination and be perceived as a borderland between Europe, Africa, and the Orient. It appears that in the case of Mirurgia, there was a further east, a plus orientalum, that they imagined in olfactory and design terms, right? Like even just look at here, in the forms of products like Hindustan, Morisca, Rosa de Bagdad, and the one you have right now in our smelling, Maderas de Oriente. So on the one hand, I find this wielding of the orientalizing impulse to be telling. I think the displacement of the othering corresponds to this the aspirational element that perfumery taps into. Does olfactive European modernity entail or require imagining how a fantasy East might not only look, but also smell like, right? Does then offering that olfactory image to a domestic market serve as a way of recentering oneself from a peripheral position? thus providing a kind of olfactory cover for Spain's own disavowed Arabic legacy? And what does its success mean? Okay. And then on the other hand, I think that actually smelling the product definitely makes the exercise more immediate and important in ways that I'm still struggling to articulate. Even though, we are out of its time, having access to even a part of the fragrance allows us to feel this archive in a different yet compelling way, right? Like we are smelling what was imagined to be an exotic scent, right? At this time, that was created by a company in Barcelona that was worried, or that was, trying to become part of Europe, right? Looking always towards Europe. And so as part of being European, orientalizing, right? This fantasy East. And then what's also really interesting in this case, I don't have time to go into here, but they did it with the south of Spain too, right? So there was, they did all these tropes of like the Roma people, the gypsies, right? Down in southern Spain. And they, at the same time as they were producing these things, were also creating stereotypical scent images of the south of Spain. Okay. Okay. So after trying to augment our sense of smell and apply it in new ways, the move to taste promises to be less complicated. However, while the idea of tasting the text, and here we have the PowerPoint AI designers' impressions of those words, may seem much more conventional, just open your mouth and let the typewriter key hit your tongue, right? Taste still has trouble gaining traction, okay? Both as a subject, mainly when attached to food, less so as a sociological phenomenon, and as a methodology for exploring our world and better understanding how it informs our existence. Tasting the text is catchy, right? Yeah, it is. And has been used as a metaphor for studies of cookbooks and cuisine history. It's also can be literal, but don't worry, I'm not going to make you drink the perfume. By savoring our subject, we gain new insights in the form of sensations that are above and beyond traditional approaches to learning. Sensorial pedagogies, such as smelling, cooking, and tasting, I would argue, can readily contribute to a better understanding of the material and sensorial contexts that make up culture. Of course, promoting this take means getting past the folkloric stigma that many in academia attach to the study of food and drink. And this is especially bad in our field, in modern languages, where food really has been treated as an ossified marker of culture, impervious to change, right? And the folklorization of food goes hand in hand with its pejorative gendering, right, of food adjacent activities and a concomitant undermining of kitchen labor, right, which I'll return to. First, though, I thought we might enjoy doing our own tasting of something that is both incredibly basic and quite divisive: water. Vichy Catalan mineral water, to be precise, which is part of my ongoing work on terroir. And if you don't know this water, you're in for a treat, or at least a new experience. We'll pour some water. All right. Okay, where are we? All right, so this is the cups going round. So now you've got your cups. Let me briefly introduce this product and give you a little primer on how its qualities and taste have come to embody the way in which the urban appetites have consumed the rural, both on the literal and symbolic levels in the area of the world that I study, Catalonia. Of course, Vichy is a loaded word, right? At once a place, a treasonous regime for many, and a category of sparkling water. These 5 letters do a lot of heavy lifting. The fact that in this latter connotation, they also bring together science, medicine, and the vagaries of taste is what inspired me to add it to this talk. Also, it's easier to hand out water. If I hand out wine or whiskey, sometimes people don't want to drink it. But the story of Vichy Catalan begins in the 19th century with a physician from Girona, Modest Forest, noticing that water coming from a forgotten well near Caldas de Malavella had some special properties. Now, this area had been renowned for its thermal waters since the Romans established a colony there called Aquae Calide, but it had fallen into disuse. Forest engaged multiple experts from the growing city of Barcelona to analyze the water, and the results pointed to a wide array of possible applications. Not only did it apparently possess anti-inflammatory properties and was suitable as a digestive aid, but it could also treat skin ailments, stimulate the appetite, and help other chronic conditions. What is more, a geologist established physical parallels between the region and the Auvergne in France, where Vichy was an already established spring site, thus bestowing extra cachet, right? Because if it's French, it's got to be good. The seeds for an entire wellness empire were sown, right? And so here we see you can go to the Balneari in Caldes de Malavella. They've redone it in this rather interesting Moorish style. The truck used to drive around all over. Okay. Now, so it's a miracle water then. You're probably wondering, okay, but what makes it so special? Its terroir is interesting, a combination of the mobility of the source water combined with the mineral content of the earth plus time. The water that emerges at the spring comes from rain that falls and is then filtered, by the ground before being collected in deep aquifers, only to then follow a long path until returning to the surface loaded with minerals. This cycle can take up to 50 years. But the quick eruption allows the water to maintain both its gases and its high temperature of 60 degrees centigrade. So let's taste it then, and I will tell you how its taste has perhaps surprisingly evolved in lockstep with Barcelona's brand, which itself has become identified with architecture and gastronomy. Okay. Comments? Mineral bitter. Alka-Seltzer. The Italians always say that. I did a tasting of this water in Bologna, and the Italian students hated it because it makes them think of that whatever they get when they're sick. Yeah. Other comments? Anyone like it? Earthy. Sweet. Salty. It's got as much salt as a Big Mac if you drink the whole bottle. A little bit, right? This, if you drink this with a big meal, it makes that trou normand. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Do they juice Perrier? This actually comes out like that. And so what's interesting, okay. So depending on your palate, it might not shock you, or it might shock you, that in 1890, the Spanish government recognized it as a medicinal water, right? And shortly thereafter, it began to be marketed in pharmacies, primarily as a digestion aid, okay? Over the years, though, it moved into shops, and it's, well, here we go. I'm a freak for salty mineral water, and this one takes it right to the edge. Yeah, so it moved into shops, and its symbolic link to the Catalan land and foodscape solidified as the water acquired its gastronomic element. So it started as medicine and then became gastronomic, okay? That is, it became appreciated for its taste and not only its effects. Its rurality gave it authenticity, and its national aura continued to grow even more when it was declared the official water of the Barcelona 92 Olympic Games. Right, the ones that inaugurated the sort of hyper mediatized spectacle that we've become accustomed to, with the enduring image of the diver right in midair with Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in the background. Okay, and you can see here Las Elegidas. It also won these trophies, being connected to Barcelona. Now, here's what makes Vichy Catalan such an interesting text to study. With the rise of Barcelona as a world city, and one predicated on both architecture and gastronomy, Vichy Catalan's subsequent use of the architect's trencadis, right, the broken tile, right? Who's been to Barcelona? Yeah, so you visited Gaudi's, and you see he's got that broken tile, the trencadis, which was brilliant because that's how you tile curves. And Gaudí was super conscious of reusing. He was like one of the original kind of use everything. Like he would use the pallets that brought stone, right? He would incorporate them into scaffolding and everything. And so he was really involved in that. So he wanted to use all the broken things, and that's what kind of drove the Trancades idea, right? And so what's happened here, see this in the bottom. I'll just pass it around because I think it's important to touch. Feel it. Is so for which they won a global packaging award. What it did was it consolidated by combining Gaudi, right? It consolidated it consolidated a move to high-end urban tables and kitchens that had been begun in the 1980s, right? When Vichy Catalan moved into the sort of gastronomic elite of Barcelona and Catalonia, and then this helped consolidate it, all right? That this process has continued to the extent that here now in North America, look at what it is. What's it called? It's not Vichy Catalan. It's Vichy Barcelona, right? This is, so for export markets. And that's redolent, I think, of larger processes at work in terms of the relationship between the urbs and the rural, okay? That it coincided with the beginnings of a culinary revolution that would see a modernized version of Catalan cuisine in many ways lead the way, right, in terms of innovation, cannot be overlooked. When considered in this light, the changing of the name invariably makes patent a new version of an old dynamic. Catalunya Ciutat, Catalunya Barcelona. Like there was always this in sort of the history of Catalan bourgeois culture, this connection with the countryside. Vichy Barcelona thus helps us understand social and economic structures of a region through a unique approach to taste, right? That's what I'm getting out of this water, right? And while traditional terroir could make a tentative claim here, right? The taste of land and how things are processed. In that relationship between the rural and the urban, the symbolic power of the metropolis imposes itself and lays bare a Barcelona appetite grown so voracious that it even needs to consume Vichy Catalan to aid its own digestion, right? As Barcelona is taking away, it needs even to drink the water itself, okay? All right. Oh, it's a little fuzzy, but I'll just conclude. In her wonderful book, A Sensory Education, Anna Harris writes cogently and convincingly on both embodiment and enskillment in a multisensory context. She contends that, quote, one does not learn 5 senses, but rather that sensory education involves a sensing that extends beyond categories and organs. This involves the practitioner in an active engagement with their world as a living, breathing, multisensory and intersensory body amongst other bodies, end quote. Now, as she points out, while traditional notions of enskillment have revolved around manual proficiencies such as riding a bike or playing a cello, recent work has branched out and considered other sensory practices like capoeira, scuba diving, cooking. So I'm going to be cheeky and insist on the importance of this last one, especially as it relates to food studies in the humanities, and consider it an extension of my smelling ethos. Put more succinctly, if you can smell things being prepared, cooked, and or consumed, then you're on the right track. Which brings me to the manifesto part of my talk, where I return to that notion that I talked about at the beginning of perceptual enrichment. But this time, not only for learners, but also for teachers. As adult educators know, there can be no transformative learning without some transformational teaching. And here, kitchen sessions in the humanities courses offer very, very fertile ground. Bringing students into a participatory, prepping, cooking, and eating environment has proven to be the most effective group activity that I've ever been part of. And I hate group activities. In those situations, recognizing the role of struggle in the students' adjustments to a new learning environment is important. We need to keep in mind that in addition to paying attention to the cultural text in question, whether a cuisine, a dish, a target smell or smells, etc., they're also dealing with new technical vocabulary, new ways of physically being in space, hand washing, calling out when carrying a knife, alerting others to how they are moving in space, retrieving proper equipment and stuff. And they're also engaging in trial and error as they work together to reach a totally different kind of goal than they normally might. And ideally, students will become part of generating the questions that we ask relating to culture in and around a kitchen as well. And what's the upshot? Why go to all the trouble? I take my students, like, we don't have a downtown kitchen, right? I take my students out to Scarborough. Why not just have them watch a video on YouTube? Because, hey, you can learn a lot on YouTube, right? Sure, but you can't learn like this. By engaging our university students in the practical work that we normally identify with colleges and polytechnics, we can break down some very old assumptions regarding what is knowledge and what is valid academic activity. So by not just deferring to the virtual, but rather returning to primary source experience, like we've done briefly here today with perfume and water, I firmly believe, as I said at the beginning, that we can activate ourselves and our students in new ways. In a moment when so many in the humanities are entrenching themselves, now is the time that we should be getting out of our comfort zones and embracing sensory experiences as tools for university-based learning. Food studies practically gift wraps this. And let me tell you, it's a great way to get out of your comfort zone. The first time I was going to lead a solo kitchen session with Spanish culture students, I couldn't sleep the night before. And I can't remember the last time I couldn't sleep because I was adding like a new poem or a new essay, right? Or a new novel to a class. So let's upend the hierarchy of the senses in the humanities and smell and taste and do our part